Hey Mike, so I want to get into carving using the Carve by Numbers set. What are some things I need to know about my setup?
Your setup. Well, first of all, I think it's potentially a little, the bench height is possibly a little low because...
For guys like us, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So generally, when you if you bend your elbow, so that really should be the ideal height for your workbench, so that
Like the workpiece or the bench?
Sorry, for the workpiece.
Okay.
Yeah. So it means that when you're working, you can be standing with a nice straight back. You're not going to be hunched over.
Yeah, that hunch is what kills me a lot of times.
And potentially, because you're going to be moving around quite a lot, I think you mentioned earlier, would I rather have a chair or a stool? It's totally okay to carve with a chair or a stool. However, the one thing that you'll find as you get into it is that you're carving with both hands in lots of different directions, and actually the ability to move around the work, it's a lot easier if you're standing. Okay. So, to have the workbench this height, the same height as your elbow,
that makes sense.
It really saves your back.
Okay.
The other important thing was how to fix your work to the bench, and you've made this really nice.
Yeah, I kind of went off what I thought I saw on your bench. I know this is primitive, but what do we need in the workpiece holder?
Yeah, well, the most important thing is that the work is fixed to the bench. So, I mean, you'd made this really nice board. It's like a bench hook, which is excellent. It's an excellent foundation. The only difference is we needed to make sure it's clamped. So by having one clamp, that means that this can't slide around. The second point is that you've got two battens here to hold the workpiece. We've just added another two, so that is absolutely firm and can't slide anywhere.
Yeah, and I think when I'm doing this regularly, it'd be smart to attach this to the table so you don't have to worry about it, and then you can move those as the size of your piece varies.
Yeah, you can, or you can just have a really long board, just a long piece of MDF or plywood, which you can clamp at either end, and then you can put your battens around it. And if it's waste, like, you know, if it's just MDF or ply, you're not going to worry about, you certainly wouldn't want to be putting screw holes into your bench top. So at least you can put it into that sacrificial piece, and that's fine, that's easy.
Okay. I know we were talking about sharpening, and you mentioned like the stones.
Yep.
A variety of stones will work for sharpening.
Yes.
Or credit card file type things.
Yes.
And then the wheels.
Yeah, so there's all sorts of different sharpening systems that are on the market, and to list some of those would be a diamond. So this is a diamond system. You sell these, right? Yeah. So you can have a diamond system, ceramic stones, silicon carbide, natural stone, Arkansas stones. There's a whole massive variety of bench stones, but the technique that you use is the same. Okay. And so what we really focus on is just showing you the technique. But these are really cool, actually, and so they work very nicely, the diamond systems. And actually, in terms of sharpening kit, depending on the severity of the issue with the tool, if you've got a really big dent, a really lot of damage in the end of your tool, you may need to grind it. And so that's a whole subject in itself. Whetstone sharpening systems are generally the best, so you can get very accurate bevels. This is the bevel here. So with a whetstone sharpening system, if you need to regrind the tool, then that's your first step. The next step, once you've got a nice clean bevel, is to use the bench stone. So then that's honing. You've got grinding, then honing, and then stropping is the last step, which is where you put a polished finish on. Ideally for your maintenance, you would mostly be stropping. Okay. You're only going to do the bench stone if it's got really dull. But for 95% of your sharpening, you're just going to be using either a power honer, which is a felt wheel in either a high-speed grinding machine or fitted to your lathe, or you can just have pieces of leather. I mean, this is a case, but just a piece of leather which you would put an abrasive compound into, and then you can slide it down the leather. that's the manual way of doing it. A bit more time consuming, but it's still as effective.
Excellent.
In turning, you turn around and sharpen your high-speed steel tools very often. When you're carving continuously, how often are you sharpening your tools?
Well, so on a turning tool, you're going straight off a grinding wheel. And because if you imagine the amount of friction and heat that is generated on your turning tools, it's going to be a little bit more aggressive.
Plus you grind a burr on a
yeah,
turning tool.
and quite often, certainly with a scraper, you're using the burr to cut. Mm-hmm. With a carving tool, again, it depends on the density of the timber that you're carving and how much work you're doing with it. But you'll know, you'll get the hang of it. Once you use a razor sharp tool, then you'll soon learn when it becomes a bit and it becomes a little bit dull, and it's so quick. It's so quick to put it on that power hone. It's literally 1-2 wipes across that hone and you're back in business. So it's not, and so as often as you like really is the answer to that. Just to keep it in, and you can see it's a lovely mirror finish on the bevel.
Yeah, it is.
Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, those are great tips. Thank you, Mike.
No worries, mate.
Good on you.
If you're
Hey, Mike, so you mentioned this for the flat work. What if I wanted to carve on a bowl?
Right. Well, there's lots of different ways to carve on a bowl, and so I'm guessing you might have a lathe because you may have turned a bowl, but so you could, for example, hold it in. So you could hold the bowl in the chuck, and if I know our Herald lathe, Envoy and Regent all have indexing facilities, which means that the chuck or the spindle is locked, and then you can rotate the carving, and it gives you a nice fixed.
That's a nice feature for carving. More even.
And you could use the chuck, though. You could take the chuck out, and you could fix the chuck if you wanted to come off the lathe. You could still use the chuck to hold the bowl, but you could either mount the chuck onto your bench, or you could hold the chuck in a vise, for example.
Yeah.
But it just means that the chuck is the clamp. And I have seen, I think I don't know that you can buy them, but it's a piece of threaded bar, essentially, that you would put in the end of the chuck, but then it could be mounted into your tailstock, into your banjo, as a tool rest holder.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I've seen those, yeah.
Yeah, so that would be, can you buy them?
I don't know. I've never seen them for sale, but I have seen them.
Yeah. There's other ways of doing it too. There's things called bench screws. So let's say you wanted to carve the outside of a bowl, and yet you haven't hollowed it out yet. So you're gonna shape the outside on a lathe, and you're gonna put it back on the lathe after you've carved it. So a bench screw is essentially a long length of threaded bar with a tapered end and a screw on it, which you screw, so the bar screws into the bowl, and then you've got a big wing nut, like a big wing nut. So the bar would thread through a hole in your bench. So now you've got a bar sticking out the underside of your bench, and you get the big wing nut, and you wind it up on the outside, and it holds it nice and firmly on your bench. That's another way.
And one other good thing, you mentioned indexing, but also the head swivels.
Yes.
So you could rotate it to
Absolutely.
a comfortable position, then use the index.
Yep.
So that would be nice.
Yeah, absolutely. So both on the Envoy, the Regent, and the Herald, all the three lathes in the record power range have not only indexing options, and not only a rotating headstock, but a sliding headstock too. So you can position the headstock in so many different positions that make it a bit more comfortable for you to use.
That'd make it really like any position.
Yes.
Very nice.